Now, one of the recurring themes also of today is the convergence of different disciplines. So we have music, moving image, tech and games are more interconnected than ever before, something which is only going to become more pronounced in future years. One man who embodies this is Ged Doherty. He grew up in Manchester and has gone on to be, amongst other things, Chief Executive of Sony Music UK, the Chairman of interactive games company Foam, co-founder of Rain Dog Films, and perhaps most notably is the Chairman of the BRIT Awards. Jed will be discussing his success and the approach Rain Dog are taking to storytelling with Caroline. So please welcome both of them to the stage, Jed and Caroline.
Hello.
Hello.
Is this working? Can you hear me all right? Yeah, grand.
Sorry about keeping my coat and scarf, and
no,
anyone got a hat they can lend me?
My coat's in the green room, but you know, if any gentleman wants to lend me theirs, I'm not.
No.
So Jed,
thank you for that introduction.
That's a lot of jobs.
Yes.
You're a very busy bloke.
Yeah, don't sleep much. Yeah.
So tell me a little bit then. Let's hear about you, Jed. And you grew up here?
Yeah, I was actually born in Glasgow, but our family moved here to Wythenshawe. From those of you who are not from Manchester, that's at the south side of the city. So we moved in when I was 4 years old, which then was the largest council estate in Europe at the time. And growing up in Wythenshawe and growing up in Manchester, you sort of get used to sort of ducking and diving a lot, for want of a better way of putting it, and communicate, especially in a place like Wythenshawe, which is divided by football between the red side and the blue side.
And what are you?
I'm a lifelong blue, of course, which against, who was that? Somebody heckling me already over there. But that was to go against my family. I'm from a large Irish Catholic family, and everybody in the family was Reds. They were United supporters. So I thought I'd be the odd one out, which is what I've been most of my career. So I chose Manchester City very early on. It's finally come good.
Yeah.
Finally come good. But so I was raised in Manchester, left at the age of 18. Well, I played in bands in Manchester when I was in my teens.
How
50s.
did they do?
They were terrible. I started out playing bands. I actually started out playing the bagpipes in a Irish pipe band in Wythenshawe, and I was absolutely useless. I could never quite figure it out. But there were shorter members, so they put me on the drums and gave me a drum, and I learned to play the drums, and I started playing drums in local bands in Manchester, and we were absolutely useless. But I enjoyed being in and around music, and there was a great music scene going on in Manchester at the time. A lot of it was underground. But I remember when I was 15 going to see David Bowie on the Ziggy Stardust tour in Stretford, which is what started me off on my musical lifelong journey of just kind of discovery and always liking things that are different. I hate stuff that's the norm. And
how was that when you were, sorry, talking to the microphone, Caroline. So how was that when you were younger then? Because as children, we're often sort of made to stop doing the things that we love and concentrate, aren't we? So you fought that, or you just pretended? What happened?
Well, no, I was very lucky to have the support of my family, who, on the one hand, coming from an Irish Catholic family, my mum wanted me to be a priest, which was the kind of, I was the eldest son, so that was the kind of burden that was put on my shoulder, for want of a better way of putting it. But I think they saw very early on that I remember for my 18th birthday, my mum sending me a birthday card about walking to the tune of a different drummer, was the phrase on the card. So she got me, and she understood that I was never quite going to do what they thought I might want to do. So at 18, I took the opportunity to go to Sheffield, to go to college there, and that was when punk music exploded in 1976. And I ran the college there and booked all the Damned, the Adverts, the Stranglers. I helped open a club there, the Limit Club. The opening night, we booked Susie and the Banshees, and I booked AC/DC on their first ever tour. So I was very lucky to be at that incredible explosion of music in the mid-70s.
Okay, and then you went from that to somehow I know you were working, you began booking bands after that.
Yeah,
you then started working on as an A&R man. Is that right?
Yeah, I started. I moved to London that was the thing at the time. You kind of had to move to London. I don't think that's the case anymore, whatsoever. But back then it was, and I became a booking agent. I hated being an agent, and I became a manager. And I was very lucky when I was 24. There's a singer I'd found who'd sold 20 million records all over the world. So I traveled all over the world, got to learn about how music worked everywhere, and ended up working in New York for Sony Music in New York for a label called Epic Records. And we just signed Pearl Jam and Rage Against the Machine and Ozzy Osbourne and Luther Vandross and all these incredible acts that I toured all over the world with. And then I came back to run Columbia Records in 1996, which is the oldest label in the world. And then we just signed the Fugees and Aerosmith and Mariah Carey, and so that the label did well. So yes, I've been very fortunate to be in the.
You skipped very quickly over your bit as a manager, which I'm quite interested in.
Yes.
No, because you also omitted to mention that you were managing Paul Young from the age of 24. Was that right?
Yeah, I was 20. I think it was 21 when I found him. He was 24.
Okay.
When we sold 20 million records. Yeah, so
okay, and lots of people will be too young to remember the in the audience. Sorry, that he was an incredibly big act.
In the time, the mid-'80s, he was bigger than Bruce Springsteen. He sold out more Wembleys.
So what did you learn being a manager? Because I think it's quite interesting that you made the move from being a manager to being then on the other side of the.
The poacher turned gamekeeper. I joined the dark side of the force, if you like, when I joined Sony Music. Not the Sony Music, or the dark side of the force. I should, for anyone who's watching from Sony, I have to be very careful saying that. I'm talking about working for corporate companies as opposed to individual companies, because as we know, they are the dark side of the force, as we know in this room. But they can be harnessed for good.
You retired from the large companies.
I've retired from the dark side of the force, exactly. That's good. I'm now with the rebel gang trying to... And as of all rebels in this room, we try and figure...
But with the corporate pension, though, hopefully.
No. Oh, I did have that until I invested in a games company, which we'll come on to later. For all of that, I know there's a lot of gamers in the room. What are we talking about? Oh, management. Yeah. What did I learn about management? Well, to me, a lot of it goes back to growing up in Wythenshawe. I know that's going to sound odd. For very early on in Wythenshawe, which was a bit of a tricky place at times, you kind of go, yeah, he drinks down at the Happy Man. Yeah, you have to watch him. She drinks at the Cornishman. Yeah, she'll be all right. So you learn to read people and understand people and communicate with people and suss them out. Yeah. And as a manager, that's what you spend a lot of time doing, is figuring out, is this person full of shit? Are they going to be able to give me some money?
No, she's
not. And again, as a manager, you learn, or I learned very early on more than anything, and that principle I've tried to keep in everything I do in my career since then, which is if you take care of the art, the commerce will always take care of itself. And the times in my career where things have come back to bite me in the behind is when I've done something for money, i.e. get investors who I probably shouldn't have got, but I needed the money, so I get them in, and then they make me compromise the art because they're worried about getting their money back.
Yeah, I'm very interested in that, because that's something that I talk to my team about a lot, actually, which is around aligning motivations. And I think that's a real business lesson, isn't it? Which is that everybody has to be on the same page with the same end in mind. And sometimes, you have slightly different, you might want to go there in a slightly different way, but you need to be, as I said earlier, you all need to be pulling together in the same sort of direction. And that's your experience as well in terms of...
Especially as a manager, and especially in storytelling, which I know is the theme of today. Because apart from the work I do in music now, I make movies as well. And what I've learned making films is every single day, you have to check in with everybody who's aligned with it to all make sure you're telling the same story. Because it's so easy when you're making a film, there's a lot of money at stake, and there's a lot of people, and there's 150 people on set, and you've got your financiers who want this, you've got your actors who want that, your director who wants this. It's very easy for the creative vision and the art that you started with at the beginning to get dissipated and lost. So, always make sure you're telling the same story every day. And sorry.
No, so just going back to, learning how to read people and the point you made around ducking and diving, that sense of having to have the big picture and be on the detail all the time. Do you think that's a core competency in building a creative business?
I hope so. Unlike Len, I have absolutely nothing in my head the whole time, because so I try and figure out what should be in there that will be of use to me. But and I'm also slightly dyslexic, so I would remember when was the chairman of Sony, and we'd come in presenting these business plans, and I'd be looking at all the numbers. I go, oh, yeah, that looks fine. I'd take a little bit out of there, because we need to save some money there. But it is that balance, but it's boiling it down to simple things. And again, your theme of storytelling. I think I used to go when I sat on the board of Sony, and every 8 weeks of Sony Music, we'd have a meeting in New York. And every year we used to have to go to our bosses and present them the strategy plan for the year. And everybody, the heads from companies around the world would come with all these like big folders and fancy videos and 50-page things. I would go with one piece of paper. And on that piece of paper it said, have fun, have hits, make money. Because my philosophy in life has been, the more fun that you have, you'll attract the right people. If you attract the right people, you'll have some hits. If you have some hits and you get smart people around you who manage the business, you'll make some money. More money you make, more fun you have. More fun you're having, the more you get good people to join you. And that very simple philosophy, along with if you take care of the art, the commerce will take care of yourself. I'm very lucky to, it's done me okay so far, I think.
That's cardboard.
I know.
So now you're, so you moved from working in music. I know you're still involved through the Brits and BPI and so on. But tell me about your move into filmmaking then, because you've gone from a business that has got quite a fragile business model, should we say, music, to an industry that's got no business model whatsoever.
Nope.
So tell me about that clever decision that you made.
Wasn't the smartest one I've heard. As I said, I've been very fortunate and very blessed in the career that I've had to do many incredible things. And when I left Sony in 2011, I tried to decide what to do. And a few people asked me to set up management companies, which I didn't really want to do. And I was looking at moving to America. And it was my daughter who said to me at the time, who was a would-be actress, Dad, why don't you set up a production company and then you can put me in all of your films? So I thought, that's not a bad idea. I thought, actually, I've always loved film. I've always loved the combination of music and film. My dream job would have been a music supervisor on a film. The person who helps put all the music and all those things together. That would have, until I've now been working in film, and it actually is one of the worst jobs, the music supervisor. But yeah, going from music, I was always lucky in the years we grew up in music where it was a real business. But in the last 10, 15 years, it has been decimated by what has happened to it. And it didn't learn. It didn't reinvent itself, which is now, for the first time in 15 years, the numbers and the figures are looking good and healthy and positive again. So growth has returned to the music industry for the first time. Leading to the film business, for those of you who are involved in film in the room, the film business, there is no business model whatsoever. It is the dumbest business I've ever come across, maybe more so than games, I don't know, but, that I've come across in my entire career. For those of you who are not involved in film, you spend your entire time trying to get a great script, which if you're lucky enough to get, then find a director, then find some cast, and then find some people who will give you money to make the film. The people who give you money to make the film want the same 10 actors, George Clooney, whoever it might be, Idris Elba, Angelina Jolie, to value your film. You spend your entire time compromising your art to put names in a film to get your film financed, which is why there's so many shit films are made, in my honest opinion. And also because of the way the big studios work, they work to a release schedule 2 years in advance, so it doesn't matter if Batman versus Godzilla's dog or whatever the next one it's going to be is not actually very good. It's coming out in 2 years' time, so the scripts get compromised. Yeah. And so they make it for a purpose.
Do you think having new people coming into the market now, like Netflix and Amazon, who are not so name-driven, do you think that's going to change things?
They've shaken it up enormously, as you've seen what's going on in the industry. When Disney bought Fox recently, and you can see the big giants and how they're playing up. It's going to be interesting to see what Apple do now in that space. They've recently gone into visual content as well. So I think from a filmmaking and a filmmaker's point of view, the Amazons and the Netflix, as you quite rightly say, where they're not so driven on who the star power is, they just want great stories that their audience engage, because all the research they've done with their audience are happy to watch and discover characters. You know, when Bryan Cranston and Aaron Paul started out in Breaking Bad, no one knew who they were. But as the audiences, we grew to love them. When that series first came out, it was a stiff everywhere in the world. But somebody believed in it to commission a second season. So I think things like Amazon and Netflix and those kind of things will be fantastic. There's still, of course, going to be a room for major studios. I work in the independent film space, which is, as I say, the dumbest business in the world. And
I know, we fund those things.
And you've been very successful at doing it, from what I can see. Congratulations with that. And can I have some money for my next film, please? And so it's interesting to see what's going on there now.
So I'd mentioned in my sort of opening thoughts around new technologies, and I know that you've had some experience of working in gaming, but I just wonder your thoughts around sort of immersive technologies and what you think that what the future might look like for people who are making content for those new opportunities. Is that something that you've got any interest in at all or thought around?
Funny enough, I got a games company who make interactive games and films wrote to me the other day and asked me to go and meet with them to give them some help. And it's not a world I know that well in terms of that interactive side of it. And I know the games world a little bit, because I invested a lot of my own money after I left Sony into a games company. And you talk about the film business being difficult. From what I've read in statistics, something like 93% of games companies never actually release a game. So we were lucky enough, the company that I got in, because there were two guys who worked for me at Sony. When they left, me and my friends borrowed some money and lent them some money to set off their games company. And they actually made a game, which was remarkable. And the game came out, and it was the #1 game in the App Store in 27 countries the week it came out. 3 weeks later, it was dead, and you've never heard of it, because we didn't have any money to compete with the freemium, the free-to-play and all those things where there's gazillions pumped into it. So that was, again, a lesson for me in terms of if I'd have known the business model at the beginning, I'd been slightly more well off than I am now.
But isn't it amazing that people continue to want to work in these industries, because they're driven by a passion?
They're driven about the passion, and it's the new frontier. Games in particular is the new frontier of all of visual media, I think, in terms of what's going on. And if it can somehow be turned into, which it is a very successful business model for lots of people.
Actually, games now, globally, games generate more income than film.
Oh, no,
so,
absolutely.
I think, was it Grand Theft Auto, whenever it was, the last one, which was, 3 years ago, whatever, it made $1 billion in 3 days.
Yeah.
So it's making masses of money, but getting into it, for people who either want to work in the indie sector or who are trying to break in, I suppose it's the whole visibility thing is the hardest thing for them, isn't it? It's not actually making the game, it's how they get it in front of that audience.
It's finding people that believe in you, then finding the audience, exactly. And just related to what you said, I'll tell you another story. When I worked at a company called BMG, who were a German media company, but they owned Arista Records and RCA Records and various other things. They were two guys who worked in their A&R department. And for the people who are not in music, A&R, the people who find the bands and sign them and make their records. There were two guys that worked in this A&R department who said to their boss one day, true story, "We don't want to find bands anymore. We've come up with this idea for a game. Will you support us?" And he was like, "Well, we're in the music business. We don't really know what to do with you. I'll speak to our people in New York, because they've got this, trying to put some money into games." So he took them out of his UK company, transferred them to the guys in New York, even though they were still here. The guys in New York were like, "Well, those guys are in England. We don't really know what they're doing. We don't quite understand it. We'll just let them go." They named their company Rockstar Games, which you may have heard of because of their work in the music industry. Grand Theft Auto was the first game they did that they'd been developing while they were at that company. So, mad ideas come from everywhere. And what I've always tried to do, and it's something that still gets me out of bed every day, is find new stuff, find new ideas, find new people. The more people tell me that's a shit idea and it's never going to happen, the more it makes me want to do it. I don't know why. Maybe it's because I'm a Man City fan, and for years you just kind of, and for years everyone said you're never going to be anything. So, you know, so stuff does come, stuff comes good in the end.
And sticking with something through the long term, you know, as your love of Manchester City proves, is important, isn't it? But do you often, I mean, do you get rid of ideas really quickly as well? Do you? Yeah.
You have to, one thing I learned, if you're going to fail, fail quickly. Try it. If it's not working, get out. Do something else. Immediately. Change it. Take learnings from it. But also for me, I'm not particularly the smartest person, but surround yourself with smart people who will tell you, I might think this is the best thing in the world. The number of times people come up to you and go, Jed, that is fucking shit. Why are you... And that, but I say that spurs me on a little bit. If people I'm working with creatively, I'll respect them. If it's outside business people who tell me that'll never happen. There was a film I made 2 years ago, came out last year, which I was lucky enough to be nominated for an Oscar for. The number of people who didn't want to fund the film because they were like, I don't think, it's not a story. Nothing really happens. And I was like, well, I think it's a brilliant story, and I think it's an important story. So it was the story of an interracial couple who married in Virginia in 1958, who were thrown in jail, called Richard and Mildred Loving, for the fact they loved each other, and he was white, and she was half black, half American Indian. And I thought that was an important story to be telling in this day and age, especially with what was going on in America at the time. And so I thought, no, I kind of think it's an important story. So for me, finding important stories, trying to get some money, cobbling money together here, there, and everywhere, which is what I still spend most of my life trying to do. And the reason I'm covered up in this, I'm sorry, because I've had pneumonia and I'm just recovering from pneumonia. And the reason I've had pneumonia is because I've been trying to do a film, which almost killed me. But we finally announced it 2 days ago, and the reason I'm excited was shooting part of it in Manchester, doing a little bit in Liverpool and some in Yorkshire, which is a film with Keira Knightley and Matt Smith and various other people. And it's the true story in the lead up to the Iraq War in 2003, when the British and American governments were spying illegally on the 6 undecided members of the UN Security Council to blackmail them to vote against the war. It's a phenomenal story, and it's never really come out. Even in the Chilcot inquiry, it didn't come out. It's an amazing story, and it's like a bit like All the President's Men or Spotlight, that kind of movie, a journalist and a whistleblower. And I love those kind of stories, and I say that's what... But what has nearly killed me is the financing of that film, even with Keira Knightley.
Who's come in on that then? Who's...
Financiers.
Yeah.
A company called E1. I made a movie called...
we've got a joint venture with E1.
Yes, they're a great company. We did a film with them. My first film was a film called Eye in the Sky, which was Alan Rickman's last movie, God rest his soul, and Helen Mirren was in it, and various other people. And so we have a good relationship with them. But going back to what I was saying before about the way the business model is changing in the independent film space, the bottom has fallen out of that market. So in terms of getting funding for important stories which need to be told in the world we live in about the crap that we're fed and the fake news and all the things that are going on, that's what this whole thing is about, and also the responsibilities of our governments. And who do things like the GCHQ, who do they really work for? They don't work for the government, they work for the British people. And the governments manipulate them or try to manipulate them. So anyway, I'll shut up. I'm rambling.
No, I think you've raised a really important point, which is if we don't invest in our culture and don't protect our culture, how do we tell the stories that are really important to us?
Correct.
And if you look at the film business, the majority of the money. Sorry, I hadn't rehearsed this, but the majority of the money that goes into our industry is American.
Correct.
Or it's from the Middle East or whatever. I mean, so we have to find a way to protect those people who want to tell stories that are really, really important to us.
It's vital. What Len was talking about before, the art, the culture, the stories from the past will inform the future.
Yeah.
And the British film industry is largely a service industry, and there's nothing wrong with that. I don't want to be in that. I want to be in the little bit over here they'll never make a penny from, but I can go to bed at night thinking I've done my bit and I've tried to bring attention to important subjects, and through that you meet like-minded idiots as well, and you normally have a good time. You have some fun. Occasionally you might have a hit, and even though I had a hit, my first film was a big hit, but didn't make a penny from it, because again the business model is a stupid model.
So So going back to all those years ago when you basically, as you said to me earlier, you had to leave Manchester in order to go and build a career. That isn't true today, as I was saying earlier. Only last year, 7,500 new jobs in the creative industries were absolutely created in Manchester. So for people living and working here now, I mean, what's your sense of the city, and what's your sense of the vibe? I know you're up here often because you've got family here, and like you say, you're going to be filming here. Football, obviously. Football.
I come a lot mainly for family things, and one of the reasons I'm excited about our film is I've never done any film work in Manchester, so we're excited to do that. We have a small office here in Manchester that my sister runs, and the lady Catherine, who does all of our reading, our script reading for all the novels that get sent to me, or scripts, she's the first person who reads them all to go, because there's not enough time in the day to read everything and do everything, so we have to have someone who can do that. She's based here in Manchester, and I'm trying to figure out, I haven't quite figured out how we do it. I'd like to have more of a presence here for our company, for how we can do that, because I think it's incredible the energy that's been going on here. Originally, that was I think I might be ignorant saying this, but that seemed to be just in music 20 years ago. But now, in particular, I know him from the gaming, and film and television
and fashion.
Huge.
I mean,
fashion,
brilliant fashion businesses.
Excuse me. Yeah, exactly. So there's never been a better time to be here.
Excellent. So. Thank you very much. I think what we're going to do is open the floor for some questions, if that's all right, because we try to make this as interactive as possible, although we've actually had about an hour of everybody speaking. But anyway, so we must hey, say one thing, do another. So have we got some people who've got some questions in the audience? There's a guy over there. It would be really helpful if you just say who you are. Is that all right? And I think Hope's coming with the mic as well, so everybody can hear you.
Hello, how you doing? Can you hear me? Awesome. My name is Reese, very nice to meet you. Something that I'm quite interested in. I was lucky enough when I was younger to go to America to do some studying. One thing I found there with their education is that they brought a lot of industry people to the university to learn. I'm way out of uni, I'm not that young, so this is a while ago. But one thing I found when I came back to England is that I lacked that industry standard of people to come into the uni to come and talk to us. I found that was more in America and not so much England. Is there a way that you'd say to create projects that could bridge that gap a bit more, if that makes sense?
Create a project
to bring more people in the industry to the universities in England a bit more.
We were talking about this actually yesterday, weren't you? About that infrastructure of bringing business more in to help and support the creative arts. I think in America in particular, I lived in America for a long time. And one thing, there are many incredible things about America, and very strange things, as there are in most countries. But in America, you're taught from the age of dot that you can become the president. And that mindset runs through everything they do. Whereas when I was growing up, I was taught if I work really hard and get all my CSEs, as they were then, and nothing wrong with this profession, I could become, what was it they were called then? Guys who'd fix the phones, post office engineers they were called then. Nothing wrong with that as a profession, so it's a different mindset to begin with. So the entire country is geared up to support business and those kind of things, and we're not. And the disconnect that Andy talked about before between education and the creative thing, there's a crime, what's going on, that gap. But I'm trying to answer your question, sorry. In terms of bringing business, do you want to see more projects that would bring business and creative together? Was that
it's kind of just, I found that, it sounds really bad, I don't want to discredit my teachers, but I found that my teachers were teachers, but they didn't know anything about the industry. I did an art course and then went on to film later on, but I just found that they taught me, but they didn't provide that link to the industry. I had to really learn that myself.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting point. I know that's one of the things that Creative England try and do, isn't it? Is be that introduction and be that
we try and
conduit.
connect people to the people that are going to, might be able to help them, but which is very challenging. But I think the point is that maybe business needs to be seen to be stepping up a bit more about being more visible about how do you get into these types of roles. We're doing something we run a program called Pro Connect in Manchester, which is all about sort of showcasing those sorts of opportunities and helping businesses to make the next step and so on. And we do something, another program which we run actually in Hertfordshire, which is called Knowledge Bites, which is much more aimed at younger people, showing them the different roles and the different routes into the industry. Because, lots of kids don't know what what a sound designer is, or an art director, or particularly I suppose in things like content marketing and so on now. Lots of teachers, for all sorts of understandable reasons, don't really have a visibility around all of those different roles. But I think there's also a real responsibility on the part of businesses to invest in the new talent base for the future, and to invest in their talent base. So trying to help them to connect with young people, so that people can get a sense of what it's like to work in that business, and what the roles might be.
Yeah,
There's a guy behind you as well.
God, it's cold in here.
God, it is, isn't it? We're going to have to do some sort of standing up and jumping around in a minute, aren't we?
It's one of the things I like about America. Anybody been to a baseball match in America? The seventh innings, you know, the seventh inning stretch where everybody's, because they've all been sat down, they all stand up and have a stretch and have a beer. You want to do that? No, and jump around because it's bloody freezing. Sorry.
Hi, Paul Bason here from Manchester Metropolitan University. I just wanted to warm to that theme, and indeed to what Caroline was saying there. We're just working on a new, what you might say is a future media school, which will put business right at the heart of teaching for all the reasons that Caroline just talked about. It's joint funded by the local economic partnership in order to make sure that we address the skills gap in this city, to create a lot more opportunity around those 7,500 jobs, all the creative companies that are coming out of that, and it will go from film through games, virtual reality, the business of the creative sector as well, because we recognise that actually it's a really vital sector for this city, and actually as one of the creative capitals of Europe, we think that's the response that the city deserves, really, in order to make it rise to the full potential.
Brilliant.
You. Thank you.
Brilliant.
Any more questions for Jed? Oh, a couple more. Oh, there's a lady with gloves on. Well done, you.
I'm very cold. Hi, I'm Elena. I'm from Macedonia. I'm part of the West Balkans visitor group. Thanks for having us here. I have a question. What do you think about the revenue stream that comes from online selling, like pay-per-view? Does it work for individuals, filmmakers? Are there any benefits from that? Can you make money out of it?
Are you talking about, can you make revenue from streaming? I think is that.
Yeah, online pay-per-view, like you, like individual filmmaker. Does it work for you to sell it? Sell online.
Can you make a living pay-per-view?
Yeah, it depends how much your project costs to start with, and how it's funded to begin with. And therefore, how much money you need to recoup from it. Can you make money from streaming yet? In that, I think remains to be seen. Because if the film industry, which to me has learned absolutely nothing that I can see yet from the trauma that the music industry had to go through, which now, a large proportion of the income and the growth is coming from streaming. And there is definitely a business in music. In terms of streaming and film, there must be a business, otherwise Amazon wouldn't be spending $4 billion next year in creating content, which I think was the number they quoted recently. So they genuinely believe there's a business, but there's a lag, there's a catch-up, because there's not enough consumers around the world paying their $7.99 a month or whatever it is for Netflix. But they genuinely believe they will. And looking at their numbers, I think they released their numbers recently in terms of the new subscribers around the world. It will come. So what's happening in film, as I say, there's that lag where there's that disconnect, which is why the bottom seems to have fallen out of the market in the independent space. Before, you could rely on a certain level of DVD sales. Because of streaming, DVD sales have died. That's gone. So, but I do think, yes, I think eventually is the answer. As an independent filmmaker, depends how much your project costs to start with, whether the streaming income will be enough. At the moment, it won't be enough. I don't think.
So can I ask then? So do you think that actually the subscription, because Amazon, Netflix, you're not paying per view, you're subscribing to it. Mm-hmm. Do you think that's, I'm just thinking for people in the audience here, rather than trying to have a business model which is based on you having that reach yourself, actually being part of an ecosystem where there is a subscription is where people need to position themselves. Whilst that we
you can
will
have a bit of
move.
both. It would be, yeah. I think, yeah. And again, there are so many. If you're a producer, there are so many things to spend your time on during the day. And if you're trying to chase your money, once you've made your product in the first place, which is a miracle that any film ever gets made or any game ever gets made. So if you get something that's made in the first place, then to somehow be part of a network or an ecosystem where people are paying to somehow view your content, that's another challenge, is how do you find that content on Netflix and Amazon. But yeah, if you need to be part of that ecosystem.
Okay. One last question, I think. There's a guy just behind that lady with the gloves on.
I'm going to stand up because I'm short. Hi, Mike Ogden. I'm an independent filmmaker. I'm a bit interested to know why you both said earlier that the film business doesn't have a business plan.
Business model.
Business model,
Doesn't have a business model that
Yeah.
can sustain the amount of, in my opinion. Oh, so I'll let you finish your question, sorry.
No, that is my question.
So why do we don't think it is a sustainable business model?
Yeah. Because then how do you then explain to investors, as you said, how
Why
they
tell
get
every
their money
investor,
back?
don't put your money in film?
Exactly. So it's...
Because you're going to lose it. Fortunately, people don't believe me and they laugh like that and they think, oh yeah, he's joking. I go, no, I'm serious, don't give me your money. The more you tell people to not give you the money, the more they want to give it you. Bizarrely. And also, you talked about before about the other countries around the world now that are now investing in film, China and various others. I'm lucky enough to have a Chinese investor who's invested in this Keira Knightley movie, which is what's helped got it made. But it's the economics, and again, I go back to the price of your product. It's how much can you make your film for? By the way, companies like Blumhouse, their business model is a phenomenally successful business model in independent films. They make genre films for $2 to $4 million, and like they did recently with Split and Get Out and all those kind of movies. They make them for a price for their audience, and every now and again, one catches fire. Those guys are the smartest people in the film business, in my opinion. So yes, it can be done. I'm not particularly smart, so I'm still trying to find smart people who can figure that part out for me.
So I think your point around price is absolutely spot on, really. With iFeatures, which, as I mentioned before, is our program for first-time feature film writers, directors, producers, we work within a framework of a set budget, so it's between £350,000 and £500,000 to make a 90-minute feature, and that's how we're able to do it, actually, because we make it for a fixed cost. We have to make sure that we choose the stories that are going to operate within that. I think working, similarly like Jed, all the things I've ever done have been slightly outside the mainstream, so used to cobbling together whatever you've got to make something happen. I do think frugality is definitely the mother of invention and creativity. And so I think that, if you can make stuff for a realistic price, and then you work with people who are very good at marketing and distribution and getting it out to the right people, that's also, part of the chemistry to get right. I think what's very challenging at the moment is to see that there is very few people in that middle space in the UK making British films. So we've got quite a lot of people working on the sort of low budget side. We've got all the stuff that we service on the high end budget side. In the middle, increasingly that's becoming a sort of a scarcer and scarcer place for British filmmakers.
Thank you.
I don't want that to be the last question because that's ending on a bit of a downer. So we need to end on a bit. So has anyone got a happy question? It's a guy with a there.
Someone's got a happy question? Great.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Alex from Media City Training, and we try and keep an eye on the future, and I have a sort of prediction that VR is going to be quite big in the way that we change how we make and watch films. I just wondered if you had any thoughts on the 360 virtual reality side of things.
I don't. I'm not an expert in that. I'm one of those people, I can't watch 3D and those kind of things but without getting a massive headache.
3D not so much, but VR,
But VR, from the VR, a mate of mine runs Sony PlayStation. It's from Manchester, big Manchester City fan. A few years ago, he showed me their first prototype of that, and I couldn't watch it. It made me sick. So I'm
Yeah.
one of those people, my brain won't quite work on it. But is that the future, is your question, I think?
I think it's,
Absolutely.
I think it's going to be a
absolutely,
fundamental
that's
change.
Yeah. I 100% agree with you. And I said this company that wrote to me the other day and asked me to come and meet with them, and they seem to be at the forefront of that on a much smaller level. I'm going to obviously go and meet with them, and I'd probably like to do it just to learn about that world, because I don't know enough about it. But you're in that space, are you?
We do post-production training, mainly using the Adobe tools, but we've always got an eye on the future, and so we're sort of trying to look more towards the 360 side of things, because I really do think it's going to be...
I'd say that in terms of the businesses that we support and we invest in, increasingly we're getting more and more and more requests for meetings and potential investments and so on from VR companies. And I do think that point, again, that I made in my opening remarks around people like to be the author of their own story. They like, we don't tell a story just to be listened to. We want to get a response to it. We want to be active. So I think that the move, I don't think we're that far actually from making quite a big leap into more immersive storytelling. And I don't know if anybody's been to The Void in Westfield in London to play that game. So don't look for the pictures of me on Instagram. But anyway, you basically dress up as a stormtrooper, and you have a
You're in the VR
visor
experience.
and all the rest of it. Yeah, VR experience. Brilliant. I can't believe, me. I'm not a game player particularly, but I think that once you take that and you mix that with cinema, I can see that once the cost base changes a little bit, that it's definitely going to be really, really big business.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Okay, well, Jed, thank you so much.
welcome.
Thank you so much for joining us. Please, can we say thank you to Jed?
Thank you. Thank you.